Welcome to the world of 21 Futures Tales from the Timechain. This book, forthcoming in December 2023 with Consensus Network, is the world's very first Bitcoin fiction anthology. I'm the editor, Philip Charter, and today we speak with one of the authors featured in the anthology, John Champaign. John,
Hi,
welcome. Great to have you here. How
thank
is
you so
everything
much.
going today?
It's nice to be here. Everything's going really well.
Awesome. Let's hope a good present as well as a happy future to come.
Yeah.
Get straight into it. What made you decide to get involved with the 21 Futures project? How did it come about?
So I think most writers these days kind of keep an eye on anthologies and sort of a chance to kind of publish a short story and get their name out a little bit. And so whenever an anthology kind of comes by, I always have a look at it. And then if a story sort of presents itself to me, kind of I move forward with it. And so I saw a 21 Futures project and I thought it was really interesting. It was such a specific anthology, right? That the stories were all science fiction. They were all about Bitcoin, and I think you get a lot of creativity when you have something really, really specific like that. If, there's an anthology about the theme of change, it's pretty hard to write just because it's just so broad. And so I
Totally.
thought right away, I thought, okay, that's really interesting. And my first idea for the anthology was a future dating scenario where two people kind of meet on Hinge or Bumble or one of the future dating sites, and they start looking one another up on the blockchain to sort of find out about one another. And I kind of thought about that, and I talked about it with my wife, and we both thought it sounded a little creepy, right? That they were using the blockchain to kind of investigate one another. And so I sort of abandoned that idea. And then I sort of thought, rather than something kind of world spanning or something with a big economy, I got interested in something that would be Bitcoin at the sort of low level, people using it as a currency in their day to day life. And I thought, well, what about some sort of crime involved with Bitcoin? And then immediately there's certain things that you just can't do with um, Bitcoin that you can do with fiat currency. And so I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if there's one of these kind of America's dumbest criminals type situation where they did something that would be plausible today and it would be a crime that could occur, but it just would be inconceivable in a Bitcoin future. And so then that was kind of the idea of that there'd be a mugging where some mugger just was just so out of touch that he thought he could get away with mugging someone for their Bitcoin and then promptly kind of gets caught. And it's more kind of held up as sort of a foolish thing that he'd done rather than any sort of well thought out crime. And so then I kind of worked on the story and prepared the submission and sent it in to 21 Futures. Yeah.
Great. And it was happily accepted. Yeah, I should say the title of John's story is The Last Mugging, which I think is a really interesting title. It's something that I immediately want to read. The last anything, it generates curiosity. And I love just hearing you talk then, John. Ideas are firing off in my mind as well of like extra stories that we could write, or this idea of a creepy stalker, like figuring out someone's life from their activity on the blockchain. And I think that's one of the things which is great about the book is just got such variety in it. And John's story is the one that kicks it all off. So we'll hear a little bit from his story a bit later in the show. Tell us a bit more about your writing, John. What kind of writing do you do? You said you often participate in anthologies, which is great. I'm a short fiction writer too, so um, that's how the book came about. And yeah, tell us about what you write and why.
Yeah. So I kind of reached the point where kind of I could retire early around when I was 39. And then sort of my retirement project was writing, and not to put food on the table, but just sort of more sort of a self-actualization type thing. And so I've been writing kind of I'm 47 now. So the last 8 years or
Right.
so I've been writing things, and I've released 7 books. Three of them are nonfiction. One's about being a landlord. One's about negotiating the best salary when you get hired for a job. And then the other four are fiction. And most of my books have ended up being fantasy books, kind of urban fantasy. I did a nautical high fantasy, and I've been interested in doing science fiction, but I hadn't really done a science fiction book. And it's strange, but when you're working at different lengths, it seems to sort of lend itself to different stories. Most of the short stories I've written have actually been literary fiction. So it's not genre fiction at all, sort of hyper realistic, sort of slice of life things. And so this was a real opportunity for a short story that was science fiction, which I wanted to do. I'm currently working on a science fiction novel, a longer science fiction book, and it's quite tough actually. It's been harder than the fantasy books, but I found that this as a short story came together quite neatly. So maybe just the form, maybe I'm just better suited to writing science fiction short stories than books. I don't know.
That's great. I mean, that's an amazing output over 8 short years, and, yeah, I think short sci-fi is tough to write because you have to do world building and all kinds of, imparting information to the reader without just telling it and dumping it all in one go.
Right.
Your story is very short, shorter than some of the others in the book, so I think you did a great job of, immediately helping people understand, what's going on. It's set
Thank you.
in 2074. Um, why did you choose that particular year? Do you have any predictions for
Yeah.
2074?
Yeah, so it's 51 years in the future, so it was kind of, a time period that the world would still be a little bit more recognizable to us was my hope, is it's not gonna be like Star Trek. It's not gonna be something that's just radically different. Um, but 51 years is an opportunity for a lot of change. The world's changed dramatically in the past 51 years. And I think every year the world changes more. So I think the next 51 years, we're going to see more change than we saw in the past 51 years. And so that was it wasn't ultra precise, but I just wanted something in that ballpark where I could have a somewhat recognizable world. But then with things had changed and people had gotten used to the changes and acclimatized to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's getting harder and harder to predict the future because the pace of our change is getting faster and faster. You know, a lot of the typical, not typical, but classic, sorry, sci-fi of the earlier 20th century was predicting, you know, what's life going to be like near the millennium, 50 years
Right.
in the future. But, you know, things are drastically different to 10 years ago for us. And it's going to get even crazier, right, in the next 10 years.
Absolutely, I agree completely, and there's been an argument that the singularity, where there's an artificial intelligence that's, greater than human intelligence, the future is unknowable beyond that point because we're just not smart enough to understand how things would progress at that point. And some people have argued that that's killed science fiction, that some of the classic science fiction, it feels like the 1950s in space, right? Where they're smoking cigarettes and being very misogynistic and whatnot in a way that seems
Yeah.
very backwards already to us, yet let alone it's supposed to be set in the future. And so I think that is a problem that the accelerating pace and the rapid changes are making it harder and harder to speculate about the future in any sort of reasonable way.
Definitely, but I think, you know, added to that, the most popular sci-fi tend to be near futures. You know, ones that really resonate with us, like Minority Report. I mean, isn't you know, a wildly crazy um, space odyssey. It's something which is, you know, many of the things in it are actually technology that we have now. And what else was I thinking about? Black Mirror, you know, sci-fi or
Yes.
dystopias like that, which are very almost already happening, right?
Absolutely. And then even it's funny because things from Star Trek, like our cell phones, are in a lot of ways better than the communicators in the original series that Captain Kirk used, right? And so it's funny. I think near future science fiction is probably a lot more popular because it's just so hard to speculate really far out now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, like with all sci-fi, if the message is true, if, the ethical or moral question which is being examined is poignant, the technology doesn't really matter. I mean, you think of something like Logan's Run, the movie. I don't know if you know that,
Yeah.
but it's a classic, right? It still stands true today because the question at the center of it is interesting, no matter that it seems a bit silly, the kind of technology, and it's a bit out of date.
Absolutely. I agree completely. Mm.
I wanted to talk about your story, The Last Mugging. It's framed as a newspaper article. Have I got that right? Is it a
Yeah.
newspaper article? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Why did you choose that format to tell a story in? It's an interesting choice, and hopefully our readers will think it's a great way to start the book as well. What was the idea behind that?
Yeah, so it just seemed to me, I guess, it was an interesting sort of framing to the story, rather than a narrative where it was this is happening and this person's mugging somebody and their feelings and reactions, where it's right in the middle of the action. I was telling a story kind of as a more traditional narrative, it sort of gave the opportunity for more perspectives on the event and a little bit more detachment. So instead of it being from the mugger's perspective, what they're thinking when they're trying to go through it, or from the victim's perspective while they're being mugged and they're traumatized by it. The newspaper format, as a newspaper article, it let me sort of have a police officer sort of offer their opinion on it, and it allowed me to have a judge offer their opinion on it. And it just allowed a little bit less of an emotional intimacy if it was in the middle of the crime being committed, where it was people sort of discussing somewhat academically this crime that had happened in the past 2 years and 3 months before the article's written. And so that was kind of my thinking with that as a format. I started a school newspaper when I was in high school and was
Right.
and ran it for sort of 3 years, and so I have kind of a tiny, tiny bit of an amateur journalism background, and I like kind of that format. And then it also let me sort of structure the story in a way, as a newspaper article, that I'm kind of giving the most important information first, and then lessen the inverted pyramid that
Inverted
journalism
triangle. Yeah,
involves.
yeah, or pyramid.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so that was kind of a nice way to sort of examine the event and convey information, and it let me get the most important information to the readers immediately, rather than kind of if it was a fiction, a narrative fiction short story, the big payoff might be at the end. So that was kind of my thinking with it.
It's such a great cheat code for short fiction. Like
Right.
you can tell us a story in, a bunch of WhatsApp text messages, or you can tell a story as a newspaper, as this one is. And yeah, what I like about that is it detaches the reader one step further. So you are reading a story within a story, really. And I think,
Absolutely.
yeah, like you say, it adds so much thought to what the reader has to do to unpick short fiction. Sometimes it can make it a bit more difficult, but it's great if it's a format that the reader's really familiar with, like a newspaper article. It's so great. I don't know if you know if you write a lot of flash fiction, a lot of even shorter fiction, like under 1,000 words, sudden fiction. It's sometimes called, but that has even more. Um, Variety of formats. You could have a story as a recipe, or a story as a pharmacy receipt, or a letter to the school from a kid's mum. And yeah, it just offers a really immersive experience where the reader has to do a lot more of the work. And I think that's very cool.
Absolutely. I don't do a lot of it. This was probably the shortest piece I've really released of fiction. and it kind of pulled me in that direction. My intention originally was for it to be quite a bit longer. And whenever I tried to lengthen the piece, the format just sort of fought against that. It wanted to stay very terse and very compact. Um, and I haven't been particularly drawn to a lot of the flash fiction like you're describing. It's interesting, but I've done sort of it's funny because my sweet spot seems to be sort of short stories to novellas. And so I even like
Mm.
shorter than a novel, but the flash fiction I haven't done much of. This is the first piece I've really done under 1,000 words.
Yeah, well, maybe that's an idea for a second installment of 21 Features. Could be a
Sure.
21 Features light or
Yes. Right. That's a
fiction.
good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, I think it's time to treat the listeners to a bit of the story. So, would you like to read an excerpt from The Last Mugging?
Absolutely. Um, if it's okay with you, it's so short. I might just read the whole thing and you could edit out whatever excerpt makes the most sense if that's okay.
Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
that sounds fine. Yeah.
Because I haven't really picked out an excerpt. I think the whole thing it's about maybe a 3-minute read, so it is quite short.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, go for it. Take it away, John.
Great, thank you. So, The Last Mugging by John Champaign, published February 23rd, 2074 at 12:56 p.m. Fraser Carver, 23, of Toronto, was sentenced today to 5 years in jail in connection to his 2072 mugging and assault of Ted Elsey. With time served taken into account, Carver will spend another 2 years and 3 months incarcerated for his role in the event, which is being described globally as the last mugging. When the crime and arrest originally occurred 2 years ago, talk show hosts and newspapers around the world joked about the event. Financial crimes such as this have become a rarity since Canada's move from fiat currency to Bitcoin. Detective Marnie Dufton's press release explained, as the Toronto Police Service's financial crimes specialist, most of my responsibilities involve presenting at conferences and discussions of historical interest. The vast majority of financial disputes these days are civil matters. I was surprised that a financial crime had occurred, then floored that it was a mugging. Initially, I was concerned that this was some sort of criminal mastermind who was pulling a stunt by committing a crime thought to be impossible. Mr. Carver turned out not to be a criminal mastermind when he associated his identity to the blockchain transaction, followed him to the convenience store where he made a purchase afterwards, and arrested him just 43 minutes after the crime was committed. Yet Dufton does not agree that this crime should be treated as a joke. Mr. Elsey did sustain minor injuries and has gone through a traumatic experience. The assault occurred because the victim had trouble understanding what Mr. Carver wanted. He didn't even understand being under threat of violence should he not comply with Mr. Carver's hostile demands. After the assault, Mr. Elsey transferred over 2 million Satoshis to Mr. Carver. At the sentencing, Judge Charles Foran chastised the accused, admonishing, your lawyer has put forward the argument that the pointlessness of your crime absolves you and shows your lack of mental capacity. I reject this argument. Although you failed to anticipate the consequences of your actions to yourself, you clearly understood their impact on your victim. Whether or not your lack of intelligence is relevant, your predatory actions are not a joke to me or this court. Later on, the day of the assault, arresting officers returned the 2,158,531 Satoshis taken from Mr. Elsey. His physical injuries were treated at St. Michael's Hospital.
Thank you very much. Wonderful
Thank you.
reading and gives everybody a little taste of how we kick off the book in semi-violent style and very journalistic style as well.
Great.
What are you looking forward to? Um, in terms of the 21 Futures project, what do you think about the other stories, or the future of what we're doing with Consensus Network?
Um, so I'm certainly glad to be a part of kind of 21 stories that are being released. I hope that people find it an interesting anthology. It's interesting because it's kind of straddling a couple of communities, sort of readers who are just interested in short stories and Bitcoin enthusiasts. And it's always nice, a project that sort of pulls two communities into one another's orbits in that way. So the readers might learn a little bit about Bitcoin, and a Bitcoin enthusiasts who don't read a lot might get a little bit more engaged with, kind of with the fiction and reading through the stories. I kind of find that most people who are readers, they've had the experience where one piece of fiction just really grabbed them and got them excited about it, and that turned them into readers. And so that would be wonderful if someone read this because they're interested in Bitcoin, and then it got them more into reading. From a purely self-interested perspective, I imagine all 21 writers are hoping that people read our stories and enjoy what we've written, and then they read other things that we've written.
For sure. I mean, we hope that too. And I liked what you said about bringing these communities together. Yeah, I'd say definitely from my experience, Bitcoiners are massive readers. They're really, keen on reading, but perhaps, as you say, are reading more non-fiction than fiction. So it will be great if some of these stories resonate, and you know, hopefully your story will resonate with somebody out there. And as a writer myself, I know if it just reaches one person, then it makes that difference. It fires that imagination, then that is really a great result.
Absolutely.
So, finally, do you have any predictions for the future of Bitcoin? What's your ideas on that?
Yeah. So my interest in Bitcoin is very much from a technology perspective. Sort of, I studied computer science, and Bitcoin got on my radar really early on. Back when there used to be drips on websites that they give you some free Bitcoin to try to get people using the technology and interested in it. I actually had an MT Gox account before they had their kind of fraud and their raid and whatnot, and so kind of
Hmm.
I lost Bitcoin in that, which was quite a while ago. Um, sorry, excuse me. I I've been really interested in the progression of the technology sort of as it went along. I'm a lot less interested in just the speculative investing element of Bitcoin. I'm very interested in it as an actual currency that people are using to make actual purchases. I suspect, like any other technology, that what we're going to see is the early search engines on the internet were like Ask Jeeves, and it was Alta Vista, and there's all of these different search engines, and they're all competing with one another and kind of fighting. And then Google became the clear kind of winner from all of that competition. But then, even once almost everyone was using Google, it continued to innovate. And so I think, just like other technologies, that's what we're going to see with Bitcoin, that the technology year over year is going to continue to evolve. It's going to become better suited to the needs of its users. And we're going to see it shift over time in its capabilities and kind of what it can do, which I find really exciting. That's really the most exciting part about it, how it's going to change over time and what it's going to become.
Yeah, great answer. And yeah, all I can say is I hope that is the case too. You heard it here first, everyone.
Yeah.
Great. Well, all that remains to be said is thank you so much, John, for coming on the show and telling us more about your story and your writing. Where can people find you online? Is there any author website or uh, account you'd like to tell people about?
Yeah. So if you just go to www.john, John, Champaign, Champaign, all one word, .com. There's links to my books. There's a blog where I write on various topics. There's links to interviews, things like this. And that can be used as a springboard for anything people are interested in. about my writing.
Wonderful. All right, John, thanks very much for coming on the show and best of luck with your future writing.
Thank you so much, Philip. It's really been a pleasure.
Thanks. Bye then.